Welcome, everyone. Okay, let's jump right into this. Today, we are unpacking a comprehensive analysis of a massive, sweeping 2,000-year historical and theological narrative. We're going to explore the profound life, the monumental challenges, and the truly lasting legacy of a figure known to literally billions of people across the globe, Prophet Isa, also known as Jesus.
Okay, let's dive into this. Think about it. How exactly does one single man's life and message echo so powerfully across 2 millennia? How does it reshape entire empires, trigger centuries of conflict, and literally forge the modern alliances we see today? Well, to understand these massive global shifts, we really have to rewind. We need to look at the exact environment into which he was born.
Imagine first-century Palestine. It was a place of deep, deep unrest. The Israelites were living under crushing Roman oppression, just completely burdened by heavy taxes. And to make matters worse, according to the sources, religious scholars had become deeply corrupt, actually altering scriptures for their own worldly gain. So in this atmosphere of total despair, the people were desperately waiting for a prophesied Messiah. But here's the catch. They were expecting a mighty warrior king to ride in and crush the Romans. What they actually received was something entirely different.
Because the story begins not with a massive army, but with a quiet, incredible miracle. The angel Gabriel appears to a pure, devout woman named Maryam, Mary. He delivers this absolute bombshell. She is going to bear a miraculous son without a father. Naturally overwhelmed, Maryam retreats into total isolation. And it was in her moment of deepest despair during labor out alone near a date palm tree that she hears a divine voice simply telling her, "Grieve not." Suddenly, a spring of fresh water flows right beneath her, and shaking the palm tree brings down fresh dates to comfort her.
Following this miraculous birth, Maryam returns to her people. And, as you might expect, they immediately start hurling accusations at her. But Allah grants Prophet Isa these extraordinary miracles to defend the truth. Right there, as an absolute infant in the cradle, Isa actually speaks up to silence his mother's accusers. No way, right? And as he grew up, living this incredibly simple life, these divine miracles only expanded. He breathed life into clay birds, he cured the blind and the deaf, resurrected the dead, and even summoned a magnificent divine feast straight out of heaven.
But as you can imagine, these miracles, and especially his strict message of Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God, became a massive threat to the establishment. Prophet Isa was actively exposing the corruption of the religious leaders at the time. So terrified of losing their hoarded wealth and influence, the priests hatched a plot. They went straight to the Roman authorities and falsely accused Isa of trying to crown himself king. This conspiracy ultimately culminated in the ultimate betrayal. One of Isa's very own companions agreed to lead the soldiers right to him for a payout.
And this brings us to the real theological climax of the Islamic narrative. While the soldiers are closing in, Allah intervenes. He raises Prophet Isa straight up to the heavens, entirely saving him from death. Instead, his physical likeness is placed onto another man. Now, some traditions suggest this lookalike was the betrayer, while others believe it was a willing, loyal companion who was promised paradise. Either way, it was this lookalike who was taken and crucified. Following this, the sky supposedly turned pitch black and a terrifying earthquake struck. Isa, meanwhile, is preserved in the heavens, destined to return later.
So the prophet is gone, he's raised to the heavens, and his followers are just left behind. Which leads us to a huge, pivotal historical transition. We have to ask, how did the original message of this simple, devout messenger transform into something completely different?
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive theological fracture that occurred next. The shift really centers heavily around a man named Paul of Tarsus. Now, originally, Paul was a fierce persecutor of Isa's early followers, but later he claimed to have actually seen Isa in a vision. Paul then introduced entirely new concepts that, according to the sources, were heavily influenced by Greek and Roman mythologies. So, while Isa taught strict monotheism in adherence to the laws of Musa, Paul started teaching something else entirely. That Isa was the literal Son of God, who died to atone for humanity's sins, basically making the old laws totally unnecessary. But think about it. How do you take a brand new, highly controversial doctrine and make it the official, undisputed truth of an entire empire? Well, it happens systematically. Paul started sending out letters to various churches. Then, fast forward to the 4th century, the Roman Emperor Constantine convenes the Council of Nicaea. Over 300 priests gathered. Leaders like Arius, who fiercely argued that Isa was simply a prophet, were completely overruled. To cement this new reality, opposing texts were systematically burned. Eventually, an official Latin Bible was established, completely standardizing this specific narrative across the globe.
The timeline of the scripture itself really reflects this turbulent evolution. Unlike the Quran, which the sources note was protected and compiled early on, the biblical accounts were actually written 40 to 80 years after Isa's time. The four mainstream Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, contain conflicting accounts. Meanwhile, those early alternative texts, the ones that maintained Isa's status strictly as a prophet, were entirely rejected by church leaders. Ultimately, at that Council of Nicaea, 27 specific versions aligning with the Son of God doctrine were hand-selected, and the rest, they were destroyed.
Centuries later, this deep theological divide led to a totally fascinating historical encounter. When Prophet Muhammad began spreading his message in Mecca, Christian priests from Najran actually came down to debate him, firmly insisting that Isa was the Son of God. When they refused to accept the Quranic verses stating otherwise, Allah instructed a mubahala. This is a mutual prayer where both sides basically ask God to curse the liars. Prophet Muhammad arrived with his closest family, and seeing their profound spiritual presence, one of the Christian priests actually backed down in complete awe, realizing the immense danger. He warned his people, saying, "By God, I see faces that if they pray, Allah will move mountains for them."
All right, let's step back into the broader historical timeline for a second, because we really need to talk about this number, 70. Specifically, the year 70 CE. This was a catastrophic turning point in world history. Following a Jewish rebellion against Roman rule, the Roman emperor's son, Titus, marched his massive army directly on Jerusalem.
The ripple effect of that specific year was absolutely monumental. The Romans completely destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, literally leaving only the western wall standing. And interestingly, this was a tragedy that had actually been prophesied by Isa himself. Over 1 million people were killed, and the survivors were completely scattered. As we move down the timeline, things unfortunately grow much darker. When the Romans adopted Christianity in the 4th century, they began violently persecuting the Jewish people, actually blaming them for the death of Isa. This intense animosity spanned centuries, leading to widespread expulsions across Europe, forced conversions, and ultimately culminating in the horrific atrocities of World War II.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this dramatic, almost unbelievable geopolitical reversal that occurs over 2 millennia. Just look at this. In the 1st century, the Jewish people were oppressed by pagan Romans. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and they were violently persecuted by a now Christian Europe. Yet in the modern era, suddenly those exact same Christian nations become the primary political and financial supporters in the formation of a sovereign Jewish state. So you have to wonder, how did this bitter, centuries-long hostility suddenly flip into a modern alliance?
Well, it basically comes down to a really unique convergence of sympathy and theology. The sheer devastation of World War II obviously generated deep, widespread sympathy among Christian populations. But perhaps more powerfully, a very specific interpretation of Christian theology gained massive traction. The belief that for Jesus to return to earth, a third temple literally must be built by the Jewish people in Jerusalem. This theological necessity acted like a bridge across that historical divide. Western Christians began heavily supporting the creation of a Jewish state, which led directly to the formation of modern Israel, fundamentally altering the map of the Middle East forever.
So all of these empires, rising and falling, the altering of ancient scriptures, the centuries of persecution, and even these modern geopolitical alliances, they all stem from differing answers to one single question. Who was Prophet Isa, truly? But the narrative ultimately points forward to a final absolute resolution. On the Day of Judgment, Allah will address Prophet Isa directly in front of all humanity with this piercing question: did you tell people to take you and your mother as deities besides Allah?
And this analysis concludes with profound clarity on this. Prophet Isa will definitively deny ever making such a claim. He'll state that he was only a witness while he lived among them, entirely distancing himself from all those doctrines of divinity that were created long after his departure. He will leave the ultimate judgment of humanity strictly in the hands of Allah. It really leaves us with a staggering reality to ponder, doesn't it? Just think about how a single message, originally meant to guide people back to the simple oneness of God, was transformed into a catalyst that redefined the borders, beliefs, and bloodlines of human history for over 2,000 years.